Just about. Where is that thing? Oh, can't see it anyway. Okay. All right. Let's go, everybody. Admit all. Good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon.
All right. So Alexandra's coming in. Give it another minute. Make sure we don't leave somebody outside. And we'll get going. Wow, what's that background you got working today? Jurassic Park?
Yeah, something like that.
That's cool.
I have a moving version of this one where the dinosaur tries to attack me.
Oh, yeah. That's what it looks like. It looks like that scene from the first movie, right?
Yeah, hang on, I'll find it.
All right. Well, we might have to go with what we've got here, just so that we can keep this moving along. Okay, let's do that. All right, let me go ahead and begin. I'll share my screen, and then I want to just point out a couple of things to you folks really quick. In the, let's see here. Oops. There we go. See that? In the modules, so I've got your lighting fundamentals here. Today's lecture is going to go here. I have some videos for you. Understandably, because of the co-ed problem that we have and the fact that we're virtual classrooms now. This is one of the classes where I used to do an in-person demo of a lot of fixtures and some lighting techniques and stuff, and obviously we can't really do that effectively here, at least not to my satisfaction in terms of giving you the hands-on that I would normally like to do. But I have put a couple of extra videos in web courses for you, and they are basically a lighting seminar I did about 2 or 3 years ago over at Los Angeles Film School. And basically I take the 3-point lighting principles I'm going to talk to you about today, and I apply them to several different types of lighting fixtures. So I kind of started a conversation with you last week when we were talking about color theory, and that there were certain instruments, lighting instruments, that expressed certain types of colors. Some could demonstrate, a full spectrum of colors, and some represented a 2-color function: tungsten 3200 Kelvin and daylight 5600 presets, or variations between those two extremes. And so in these videos here, what I'll do is I'll take some conventional fixtures and use the 3-point lighting techniques with those. Then I'll show you how to add something we call modifiers, which will change the shape, the intensity, and the degree of hardness of some of these fixtures, and show you what that's all about, and apply that to 3-point lighting. Then I'm going to switch and use some photographically corrected fluorescence. Remember, I talked about Kino flows last week. So I'll show you a couple of Kino flows in a 3-point lighting scenario. And then I address the LED panel situation, such that it was a couple of years ago, and apply that to a 3-point lighting situation. So this is, in essence, your virtual demo on lighting fixtures and how to apply them to the 3-point principles that I'm going to discuss with you today. All right, so I wanted to point that out because it's as close as I can come in an online environment to giving you some sense of what these fixtures are going to look like, how they're going to play with one another, how they look on your talent, and how to manipulate them a little bit and give you some frame of reference. In cinematography 2, we will address the lighting problem more extensively, and that is a hands-on class. And so far up to this point for the fall 2021, it is scheduled to be a face-to-face class. So that is, I suppose, good news in light of the pandemic. Provided that no situation arises that prevents us from going to face in the fall, and requires us to go back to virtual classwork. We will have an extensive hands-on approach to lighting in cinematography 2 if you would like to take that class. Okay, so that was the modules that I wanted to bring up to you. Also, just really quickly, I wanted to share with you a quick detail. So you have a 3-point lighting assignment. It's very easy, though. You won't have to check out any equipment. You won't have to go to the campus, and you don't have to own anything necessarily to do this assignment. You're going to apply what you learn and what we discussed today about an application online called Virtual Lighting Studio. And you're going to use that app, that computer app, to do your homework assignment. And the details of the homework assignment are here. This is the app. I'm going to show it to you in the lecture. And then the criteria for the assignment, pretty simple. I'm going to have you do a 3-point lighting scenario with your avatar, and you can pick whoever you want to light. And you're going to then take a frame grab of your screen. Since this is an app that is free for you to use and access as often as you want, I don't believe it will save your work without some sort of donation or purchase. So what you can do is certainly work within the app, experiment with all the tools. It doesn't limit you in any way in terms of functionality. And then when you get a solution on your screen within the app, just use your frame grab function on your computer, or your snippet function if you're a PC user, and Apple, I think it's called Grab, and just take that frame or take that screen image, and you'll submit that as your homework assignment. Okay. So that's all here. There's a very quick little rubric to give you some sense of what I'm looking for, and then very, very brief and simple instructions. I think it's a pretty simple assignment. And really, more than anything else, it's designed to introduce you to this application and give you another virtual tool that you can experiment with, kind of like the depth of field simulator app that I showed you all. Something that you can, work with regardless of access, um, regardless of time of day, and weather, and whatever other possible variables could trip you up in any other situation. You can just fire this up on your phone, on your laptop, on your iPad, and play around with it and experiment with 3-point lighting within the virtual space. So I think it's a pretty cool app, and I'm going to talk to you about that here pretty quick. So I think that's all I wanted to mention from the modules. Um, yeah, I think so. So let me move quickly into the presentation so I can get you through this. It's about 63 slides long, but it should move pretty quickly. It's a lot of illustrations. So today I'm going to talk to you about um, 3-point lighting fundamentals. Okay, from the 3-point lighting approach. Okay, it's part of the basic lighting module in Cinematography 1. And the outline for today's discussion is going to be intro. I'm going to talk to you about the concept of lighting for 3D and a 2D media. I want to give you some examples from classic art, particularly classic oil on canvas from 15th century to 17th century classic realism. And then I want to talk to you about the three lights that are denoted by the 3-point lighting scheme that we're going to discuss. I will talk to you a little bit about top lighting, not a lot, I don't think. I want to talk to you about a PDF really quickly that you'll have to read called Lighting Backgrounds and Environments. And then I'm going to show you the lighting simulator application. Okay. So here's the other thing I want to do today, which I haven't really done before, but I want to test this out with you, is I'm going to go full screen on my presentation because a number of these slides are going to have some detail that I want to make sure you can see it in a reasonable size in reproduction. So I'm going to do that, and which is going to kind of disguise my cursor a little bit. So I won't be able to see you, but I'll be able to hear you. If you have a question, just speak up, and I will address it as quickly as I can. And we'll move through this pretty quick. Okay, so stand by for full screen mode. Whoops. Here we go. There we go. Okay. So can everybody see the screen okay?
Yep.
All right. Now I can't really do anything, I guess, about this this little thumbnail board over here off to the right. Hopefully it won't get in the way of any of the graphics. But okay, so here we go. So lighting, I want to talk to you about lighting in terms of the non-verbal communication aspects of the art form. Okay, so from one of the textbooks I gave you on your bookshelf, Cinematography Theory and Practice, we speak about one of the most important tools that we can employ as filmmakers, and that's visual metaphor. Okay, does anybody know what a metaphor is? I'm sure you do. I'm sure you've heard it before. Okay, it's a term referring to something that somehow refers to or references back to something else. The idea that images have literal meaning, and they can also have implied meaning. Okay, and the implied meaning, I think, is where the metaphor concept is coming from. At its center, the most dramatic lighting schemes have both literal and implied meaning. In visual storytelling, few other conventions are as effective or as powerful as our lighting. Good lighting can communicate complex ideas non-verbally, but with an equal emphasis on mood and tone. So it's a good way to enhance any story when it's combined with good cinematography. Finding the correct key light placement is the first step in understanding the context of your entire lighting setup. Okay. I have a quick little, I don't know what you call this, a limerick maybe, but it's something that allegedly was scratched into the timbers at one of the older lots in Hollywood. It's called The Genesis of the Cinematographer. And it goes, in the beginning, God made the cinematographer. God saw the cinematographer and said that he was good. The cinematographer saw God and said, turn your head so it is backlighted. And God said, but I'm God. And then the cinematographer said, I don't care who you are. Front lighting is no good. And so God turned his head. And it's a funny little sort of story that is going to be emphasized by the concepts that I want to talk to you about next, which is shape, form, and texture in your lighting. Flat front lighting doesn't reveal dramatic shape or texture in your subject. It renders poorly in 2 dimensions what dramatic lighting can achieve through specific placement. Okay. So the appearance of 3-dimensional quality in a two-dimensional medium is the fundamental objective of our lighting, right? We're trying to create shape, a sense of depth. We're going to give our subjects a feeling of dimension, even though they're being projected on a flat screen or whether we're watching them on a flat monitor. Okay. As lighting moves around the side towards the back of your subject, the various details of texture and geometric shape and form can emerge. This is important for defining the depth of a shot, but it can also establish the mood of the scene or the tone of a character's performance. In the end, light can help reveal story points that are not clearly defined in the dialogue. So the idea is that the lighting can suggest moods, can suggest ideas, or reinforce themes that are reflected in the performance of the actors and in their dialogue. Okay. And I want to show you this neat little quick little video clip. It's called Sparkles and Wine, and it's really neat because what the filmmakers have done is they've taken a camera and they have positioned a subject in the center of the frame against black, okay, like like what I'm doing here, and then they take a light fixture, a light source, and they start moving it all the way around the subject in 360 degrees, and they'll change color, they'll change height, they'll change hardness and softness. And it's really neat because in about a 2-minute video, it shows you in time lapse this light moving around, and it has a real dramatic sort of flavor to it. Check it out. So pay particular attention to the shadows on the face and notice what happens as the light moves. The shadows are changing, right? So it gives you a sense of what kind of quality and shape you can achieve by moving that light around in space. So we got a low key working here sometimes. We get a high key working at other times. This is a very diffused front key. I like the music too. I think it's good. So unfortunately, we can't do the assignment that I would normally give my face-to-face classes, which is I have you guys basically recreate this video for yourselves. And it's called the shot clock. And I have you set up a camera and a subject and just shoot video of your key light and continue to move it around. If you could superimpose a clock, from the bird's eye view, looking down at your set with the camera at 6 o'clock and the subject at the apex where the hands would be pivoting around the face, and then place your key light at noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, all the way around the shot clock, right? And look at the way the shape of your subject changes. And as you have a high key or an eye level key or a low level key, you can see how the shadows on the face and the shape of the face can emerge. And you can see how you can start creating depth and shape based on the choice of where you put that initial light source. And the initial light source is what I want to talk to you about next. In order to do that, I want to give you a quick talk about where the inspiration for the single light source concept came from. And I'm pretty sure that most of you recognize this fellow. If you don't recognize him by his image, you might recognize the name. Is there anybody here that hasn't heard of Rembrandt? Well, that's a good sign. Okay, so we all have at least heard of Rembrandt. If you're not familiar with his work, you can see that this self-portrait is circa 1636. And this is about, I don't know, midway into his career. So he is, early 17th century guy, right? Classic painter, photorealism, and he has a pretty distinctive look to all his images. Around the same time, we had a number of Dutch painters who were painting with more brightness and more color contrasts, and weren't bothering to use any sort of three-dimensional shadow play in their renderings. And so the images all had kind of a flat almost cartoonish look to them, or certainly not a realistic look to them. And I think Rembrandt, coming from the northern reaches up in uh, uh, Copenhagen, Denmark and Amsterdam, places of those nature. There's a certain kind of lighting in those high latitudes. They do a lot of things indoors because the weather's very inclement, doesn't always promote going outside. And so I think that, those constraints were sort of effective in shaping the way Rembrandt worked, because he worked inside a lot. He used, candlelight or window light. And therefore, he was sort of, his eyes were getting used to seeing light in a certain way. And so I think his paintings were reflecting that sort of mood and that intensity. And he was noted in particular for creating very striking portrait images where he used just one light source to light both his subject and occasionally the background, and from a very specific point in space, which is, if I was to, just sort of describe it to you, if you took a light source, I don't know, something as simple as your mag light, and you start at right from the camera lens, obviously, and then you start moving up into a position that is about 45 degrees from my look to the lens in space, and then move it off to one side or the other. And it really doesn't matter which side, but off axis from your look to camera and about 45 degrees to 60 degrees up angle, right? That's about where his sources were coming from. And you can almost imagine, like, if you were sitting at the dining room table and the chandelier over the dining room table was on, and you were, the chandelier is usually situated over the center of the table, right? So if you're sitting off to one side of the table, that's probably the right angle on the centerpiece. And then imagine that you're sitting to the left or to the right of that centerpiece. And the idea is, by shifting from the center to the left or to the right, we create the three dimensionality of an offset key, which will start with a highlight on one side of the face. And you can see that over Rembrandt's right eye and on his forehead, you can almost see the highlight from the light source. And as the light sort of reaches around to the far side of his face, it starts falling off fairly rapidly in tone and exposure. Okay. And it's radiating off to a very nice sort of open shadow, slightly open shadow on the left side of his face. And in doing so, it kind of creates a dimensionality, a three-dimensionality to his visage. And on his left side, notice he's got a little sort of bright patch on his receding cheekbone, right? And we refer to that as the golden triangle, right? So when you have your light source in just the right spot, so 45 to 60 degrees above camera and off axis to your look to the lens by a little bit, that point in space will give you that Rembrandt shaped key with a golden triangle on the shadow side of your portrait, or of your close-up, in other words, right? So Rembrandt's lighting is a technique that he used in the studio. It's been adopted by photographers and cinematographers over the years, and it's I think it's a very expressive means of lighting your subject. A lot of magazine fashion photography, for instance, tends to be very flat and dimensionless lighting, and you have to think about the objectives that that photographer might be serving by lighting up a subject totally flat without any shape or texture. Cosmetic ads, for instance, and many fashion ads where the idea is to either see a blouse or see a product that the model is wearing, or to actually see the makeup applied to, say, eyeshadow for the eyelids, or mascara for the lashes, or rouge for the cheeks, or base for the face. The lighting needs to sort of be flat, because in that context, what we're trying to see is the application of the makeup. So in a Maybelline commercial, Revlon commercial, L'Oreal commercial, something like that, you're going to see makeup that, or I'm sorry, lighting that's really going to come from almost just over the lens and kind of right straight into our subject, so that we don't get these really dramatic shadows happening on the face. And that's fine for those types of applications. But when we're talking about drama now, we're talking about actors performing in a space and delivering lines of dialogue that are eliciting emotions and responses from our audience. A lot of times that sort of flat pancake lighting, we call it, doesn't really support the mood of what we're doing, right? So we adopt these other fundamental practices like the Rembrandt lighting, because it opens up a really interesting and fairly broad range of options for us in terms of cinematic shape, texture, and tone in our lighting. Okay. The interplay of highlight and shadow is critical in this kind of lighting, and the Italians refer to that as chiaroscuro. Okay, chiaroscuro, it's the Italian for light and shadow, or the interplay of light and shadow. Okay, it's one of the classic techniques used by guys like Rembrandt. Da Vinci used it later in his career, Caravaggio. And it refers to the use of highlight and shadow to create the illusion of light from a natural source, shining on the figures or objects in a painting. It's also a technical term used by artists and art historians for the use of contrast in light to achieve a sense of volume in objects or in figures. And so here's a really good example. This is by the artist Caravaggio. This is St. Thomas, and it's circa 1602. And what we have is we have a classic scene from the Christ legend. And in this particular panel, Caravaggio is introducing us to the character of Doubting Thomas. He's the central character in this tableau, and you can see he is examining visually and with his index finger the wound on Christ's rib cage, allegedly uh, from the spear from the Roman centurion that was guarding his crucifixion. And so this is a story from the Bible, and Caravaggio is depicting it with all of the mood and drama and intensity that he imagined would have been taking place at this moment when Christ reappeared to his apostles, and they were in shock and disbelief because they had seen him apparently perish in the crucifixion, and yet here he is in front of us. And then, of course, the character of Doubting Thomas emerges, and he wants to see the proof. And this is that scene, that moment isolated in time. And what's neat about it is you can sort of see the drama in all of the faces, the shape and the textures and the directionality of the lighting. It's clearly coming from something like a Rembrandt position, right? It's if we as the viewer are the camera and our subjects are in front of us, about 8 feet in front of us, we can see that light source is it's somewhat high because it's reaching the fellow even in the back, and it's getting him full on the face. So we know if that's the case, then that light must be above head height somewhere, right? And it's coming down at an angle that is not quite fully in front, because if it were close to camera, we wouldn't get these shadows under Thomas's chin and beard as we do. So it feels like that light is coming almost from the side, but slightly up high, and it's kind of coming from one direction and hitting the group as a whole and falling off rapidly from frame left to frame right. This is one of Leonardo da Vinci's sketches, and even with charcoal on paper, you can see how Leonardo was very concerned with the shape of the face and how it renders with the media he was using. And this is like I said, charcoal on vellum. So, he's using different combinations of hardness and softness in the application of the charcoal. But what I find particularly interesting is the fact that somehow he's able to incorporate highlights and very subtle transitions in the face of the subject. So the subject is clearly lit from what we would consider a Rembrandt key, although you can see by my uh, by my my description line down here, this sketch is circa 1467. So this sketch predates Rembrandt by about 130 years, 140 years. So Leonardo was thinking about it way back when. Uh, even even before the Americans started colonizing the United States, Leonardo was thinking about how to render the face of a subject with three-dimensional quality using charcoal and vellum and flat paper. Here's another scene from Caravaggio. This is Supper at Emma's, again around 1602. And this time I've put little arrow icons over the image so you can kind of see where the light source is coming from and the vectors that are striking the different characters within the scene. So you can see the protagonist is clearly the individual who's situated closest to the center of the frame. And oddly enough, that is not Caravaggio himself, but what he frequently did was use his own image for characters in his presentations. So I guess to leave his mark for generations afterwards to discover and sort of appreciate or have fun with. But you can see all of the patrons. I suppose they're in an inn, perhaps having dinner, and the patrons in the deep background are getting hit with a certain sort of quality of that same key light that's hitting our hero, who's commenting on the quality or the value of the dish. He has somebody that he's dining with who looks like maybe he is, asking him about current events, maybe. And then he has another individual that has his back to us, and it's three men in a conversation at the table, and then two onlookers from presumably the inn staff or the staff that are running the lodge house that he's eating at. But I think it's very interesting drama too. If you look at the central character, he's clearly nearly half lit. So there's very little transition from the highlight on one side of his face to the shadow on the other side of the face. Very dramatic. This has a lot of psychological underpinnings and a lot of subconscious meaning for an audience that I won't get deeply into here today. It's more of a cinematography 2 concept. But the idea of a half-lit figure is a figure who is a character who's conflicted in some way. They're of two minds, right? One side of their mind is thinking one concept, and the other half of their mind is thinking another concept, whether it's good and evil, health and sickness, happiness and sadness. Do I kill them or let them live? Whatever it is, the half light sort of symbolizes a character who might be in a conflicted state of mind. So this fellow who's looking over his meal might be wondering whether or not the meat was prepared well. Who knows? I mean, but that's the idea, right? Is that we can subconsciously we can introduce themes into a visual without the characters even saying anything, and then hopefully we can use the right sort of lighting cues or lighting shape, direction, and texture that will elicit the correct responses from the audience that sort of parallels what the dialogue and the performance is trying to tell them as well. So it's kind of like a double whammy. They get it through the dialogue, triple whammy maybe, through performance, through dialogue, and through the visuals, through the lighting itself. Here's a really great image. This is made with milk. This is by Jan from Vermeer. I'm a big fan of Vermeer for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is he gave us what I think is the closest representation of modified key lighting that we have to date, really. The idea that Vermeer also came from similar humble beginnings, like Rembrandt came from the same part of the world. He came along about 60 years later, but when he did, he was working from a studio in I believe he was in Amsterdam, and he always used the same window in his studio to light his subjects. And so the lighting had a very particular look that he liked. It was very directional. It was soft because it was a north facing window, and so it never got direct sunlight through that window. It would get sort of diffused or redirected soft light through the window, which rendered, very nicely on the face without really stark hard shadows. The harder a light source is, the more direct a light source is, the deeper the resulting shadows can be. So if you have a window that is north facing, that doesn't get hard direct sunlight, but rather gets reflected sunlight or diffused sunlight to come through that window, it's going to open up the shadows within your subjects, and you'll still get that directionality, but the contrast won't be as high as they would be with direct lighting. And this, if you go outside in Florida in the early afternoon, right after lunch, if it's a clear day and the sun is shining, you can see how hard the shadows are on the landscape and on your colleagues as you talk and walk down the sidewalk. You can see the deep, hard shadows that the direct sunlight creates. So Vermeer was particularly attracted to the view this one particular window had in his studio, and he used it constantly for all his different subjects. So the paintings will change in terms of subject matter, the subject within the frame, their clothing and makeup and implements or props, but it's oddly always in the same corner of the room with the same kind of window happening. So I think that's kind of funny, but it's really neat. He was dedicated to that particular look, and he used it quite successfully for a number of paintings. Here is the girl with the pearl earring. You probably have heard of this composition before. There was a movie that bore the same name, Girl with the Pearl Earring, and it was basically a docudrama, I guess, about the life of Vermeer. I think it was Scarlett Johansson that played the girl. Um, and this is the actual painting. This is what the real painting looks like, and you can see how it has a very interesting shape. Her key light is clearly not centered but off to one side, but it has a fullness about it. So the golden triangle that Rembrandt would have insisted on is less pronounced here. It's much bigger, and it's taking up a greater portion of her cheekbone that's under her leading eye. That's the eye that's in the center of the frame looking directly at the camera. And you can kind of see how that source is coming from somewhere off to the side, but it's a little fuller. It's coming around from a little bit more in front than Rembrandt's key would have been. So Rembrandt probably would have put that key back here somewhere, right? And her key is clearly coming from more around front, so that it's reaching onto that low side eye, we call it, and sort of filling in the gap that golden triangle and the shadow, the resulting nose shadow that would have occurred. And this is something that we'll do oftentimes. We'll soften the contrast in our lighting to accommodate the subtle details of a beautiful female subject. A lot of times the females will have very subtle facial quality that you have to be very careful in order to render the shape. It's very delicate shape that can be very quickly spoiled by the wrong key light position. Guys are a little bit different. And I have a PDF for you guys to look at called How to Light Women, How to Light Men. And it talks about that very concept, about how a man with very chiseled and stark features will look good with light coming from almost any direction except frontal, and sometimes too, depending on the character of the relief of his face, he might look good with the light coming straight at him. But a lot of times women with their particular angular cheekbones or a certain quality about the jawline or something, there'll be one magic angle that will just absolutely work. And so that PDF, that reading is about that concept. I hope you enjoy him, by the way. Here's another fellow that used a window for his key light inspiration. And this is Gabriel Metsu. This is from around Vermeer's time, 1658, and it's called Woman in Her Toilette. And basically what it is, you know, she's preparing for her day, whatever it is that folks in 1658 were doing. But she's lit very sort of softly and fully through that window. And the window is lower than Vermeer's window, if you notice, but there is a higher window that is partly curtained off. So that might be the window that the old woman is getting a little bit of both of those apertures with the light coming through. And then the girl who's seated is probably getting the bulk of her exposure from the window with the open shutters. This is a piece of a larger composition, okay? It's by Guido Cognaci, and it's kind of a montage. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the bigger frame, okay? There's several characters. There's there's a representative of the supernatural, maybe the devil, and then there's these two women in the kind of the lower off center, sort of in the lower corner here happening. The whole image though is called Martha Rebuking Mary. Okay. And it's interesting because there's a lot of shape going on. And you can see even in the background, even where I've cropped this image from the larger frame, you can see the sun angle because you can see those sort of spindly columns in the upper right in the background, and you can see a very hard sun angle that looks like the sun is quite low in the sky actually, and creating those long shadows, and the light would be warmer because of the time of day, which probably accounts for the warmth that we see here. Okay, so this is called Martha Rebuking Mary. So we know Martha is the individual who's slightly positioned slightly higher. She's seated upright, and she's admonishing her in some way. She's got her finger wagging, right? Oh, you kid, you know, she did something. We don't know what, right? And so Mary is the individual in the more subservient or inferior position, low angle looking up. Okay. That is a psychological connotation that Mary is somehow at a disadvantage, or she is somehow lesser in station to Martha somehow. We don't know. Maybe it's younger sister, older sister. Maybe it's lady of the house and servant or friend or child. Not quite sure what the relationship of these two young women is, but clearly somebody's getting sort of yelled at here, right? And you can kind of see the shape that's on Martha. She's got that very sort of directional key light. You can see how the shadow is really accenting her jawline. She's got kind of deep eye sockets from the light, which is clearly positioned well above her head and off to one side. So it's giving her what we call raccoon eyes, which are the deep sort of eye socket shadows that we get from a source that's fairly direct and from a high angle overhead. And she's got quite a bit of cowling shadow or neck shadow, right? So her key light is clearly coming from a predetermined position. And of course, Mary is turned away from it completely. So Mary is pretty much fully in shadow. And the only illumination that's really showing us Mary's face at all is whatever is bouncing off of Martha's dress and back onto Mary's face. If you can kind of see that, right? We call that return. In other words, a hard light source is coming down, hitting a subject. That subject has a white shirt. That white shirt's going to do a lot of reflecting. And whoever is standing, adjacent to your subject is going to get all of that bounced light that's bouncing off your white shirt and returning onto their face. Okay. And this is a kind of a classic lighting trick we use a lot, especially in cinema, because whenever you got two people in a frame, there's always going to be some kind of a compromise. Who gets the true key position and who is in the secondary position to that light source? And very rarely do subjects get the same treatment from the same light source at the same time? Usually the only way that'll happen is if we got two people standing opposed to one another and a light source positioned equally between them and slightly above them. And then they both get kind of the same shape from the same light source. Otherwise, if it's a street lamp, somebody's going to be facing it, somebody's going to have their back to it. If they're both in profile to it and the light is striking them, if we see them from the shadow side, they'll appear to be silhouettes with just a trace or a line of edge light from the street light. If we're on the other side, they'll both be flat lit, and that's a position we don't want to be in from a cinematography standpoint. So it's usually the angle we avoid, right? In this particular case, Martha is facing into the light and Mary is facing away from the light and getting scolded. So there might be some subtext here that we can make some very predictable assumptions about. Does anybody know what I'm driving at here? What do you suppose the relationship is here between these two girls?
I'm thinking sisters.
Yeah, they kind of look like that, don't they? And what do you suppose could be the context of this conversation, if we want to call it that?
Honestly,
Yeah.
the one wearing purple is scolding maybe her younger sister for like being a whore because she's naked on the floor.
She kind of looks that way, but I think she's got something on here that's sort of, but yeah, she's more or less very scantily clad. Yeah, it's almost like you get this sense like, how could you date that guy? He's such a hound dog or whatever. You can almost kind of hear the argument, right? I can't believe you slept with that guy. He slept with everybody in the freshman class or whatever. It's that kind of thing. And the other kind of sort of very predictable assumption we can make from this is if Martha is doing the rebuking and Martha has the light on her, then the traditional assumption is she is the enlightened one. She's the one that has the right perspective on this. She's the correct one, right? And because Mary is in shadow and from the low looking up, Mary is accepting her rebuke from a point of maybe she realizes she did wrong. She's somehow guilty, right? We can make these sort of assumptions about these two individuals just by the light we've chosen to place them in. Now, the only way to know for sure is to hear the dialogue that these two are, bouncing off of each other. We don't have the benefit of that. So that all we have is the subtext and the assumptions we can make based on the traditional interpretations of the lighting, right? So this is where you kind of want to be aware of what these traditions and these natural the assumptions can be, because your audience may be working from those very same precognitions, these assumptions, this, sort of, we've seen this before, we were told what it meant over there, it must mean the same thing over here, right? And so when we do our lighting, we want to be careful that we don't sort of impose any context onto our lighting style that might elicit some responses from our audience that we didn't intend, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, here's one of my favorites. This is The Mocking of Christ, and it's by Matthias Stomer from 1633. And I like this painting for several reasons. The first is it's all lit by one light source, and it's a candle. Everybody in this frame is getting the same treatment from the same light source. But based on their position from that light source, they're getting treated slightly different one from the next. So the fellow who's holding the candle, I think he's probably offering the sternest rebuke, whatever that is. We don't know, but it's called the mocking of Christ. So we know that they're not there to make him feel good. He's got the crown of thorns on his head. His hands are bound. He's looking downward and dejected. This is probably, moments before they're going to march him out and put him on the cross. And these guys are coming up to say, why didn't you just tell him what he wanted to hear? Why didn't you just deny it? Why didn't you just, whatever it is that, whatever the dialogue from the legends revealed. These guys are there and they're not making him feel any better about the situation. It's solemn, right? You got the two guys kind of in the front. It's almost like they're looking, waiting for a response out of Jesus, and he's just not giving it. But look at the way they're lit, how they're looking across our frame. So they're turned profile to our lens, if you will. They're looking across the light source of the candle and they're looking at the subject of their ire, right? And he's not having it. And they are lit full in the face, but not from our point of view with the camera, if you will. From the camera point of view, those guys are half lit, we call it. But because they're looking into the key, they get it full in the face and we get to see the shape of their face very, very graphically. And as the light transitions and radiates off from highlight to shadow, it further defines the shapes of their faces. And look at their jaw lines. Look at their nose, their laugh lines here leading down to the mouth. They're both bearded characters, so it's a little hard to see what the chin is doing, but you can see that the shadow kind of happens pretty quick and the transition is pretty fast from the highlight to the shadow. It goes from a bright highlight to wham, deep dark shadows receding to black, right? This guy holding the candle, because he's slightly behind that candle and open to camera, we call it, not turned profile, but he's open somehow to camera. He's getting it a little more full in the face and we can see that more. His transition line is further back than the other two guys. And it's softer in its radiance because the shadow it can't really grab hold because he's turned into the light. So the light is really transitioning, is falling off, we call it, very slowly. And then the fellow in the deep background, who's over the back shoulder of Jesus, he's got a shadow running across. His light is lower than his point of view. So all his shadows are kind of working upward, right? So he's got a little sort of different dynamic going on with the interplay of his shadows. And then Jesus is getting it full in the face because he's like right there immediately in front of that candle. You can also kind of see that it looks like there's two flames coming off the top of that candle, which means it's a double wicked candle, which is something that we use in cinematography all the time. A candle with one wick will give you basically a 1-inch tapered flame, right? And that'll give you about, so much light. A double wick candle will burn almost like twice as bright, right? And so they come single, double, and triple wick in terms of candles. This looks like a double wick candle, so it's very bright. It's giving us a nice soft ball of light right in the middle of this whole group of guys, right? And then it's radiating off very quickly because it's a point source instead of a big broad source like a window. It's creating deeper, darker shadows than it would if it was the maid with milk in front of the window, right? The window with the north light creates a much broader, softer source. The candle is 1 or 2 tapers this high. We call it a point source, and it's radiating out from that point and creating deeper, darker shadows that happen more quickly on the face. Okay. This happens to be the other reason I really like this image. This happens to be a graphic illustration of something we call a foot candle. The foot candle is a unit of measure that we have adopted in photography and in lighting to describe how much light in a certain volume of space are we dealing with, and what's the standard, what's the benchmark. This is the benchmark. From exposure now, we can change variables around and we can switch these numbers and we can make them look like one thing or make them look like something else by just manipulating the variables and changing factors that govern exposure, shutter speed, f-stop, frame rate, shutter angle. Okay. But we have to start from one common benchmark, one place that never changes, whether the ISO changes or the f-stop changes or any of the other variables change. This one thing will always be constant, and that is the foot candle. So how much light do you get from a 1-inch flame 1 foot away from a square foot of white, say, paper, right? And the answer is 1 foot candle of light. Okay, so that volume of luminosity, right, it'll register on a light meter. Okay, I can get my my Sekonic to register down to 1 foot candle. If I change my mode here, I can go from frames per second to foot candles. Oh wait, I can't do it with the 508. I have to have my 558. Sorry about that. I can't show you. I was going to show you. But the 558, my 558 meter will read in foot candles, and it'll tell me how many foot candles exist in this area on set. So if I want to know how bright the set is before I start adding a key light for an actor, I can take my meter and I can go into the set and I can take readings and I can find out how much light is here. What do I have to work with? And that gives me a sense of how much I can add before I start creating problems of imbalances. You know, a key light that's too bright now needs the background to be brightened up, or vice versa, right? And so the foot candle is the standard of measurement. For instance, folks who design department stores where you go to shop for clothes or for makeup, right? They use the foot candle principle to figure out how much light they want for the shopper to be able to browse and look at the apparel or look at the jewelry or look at makeup in a mirror, and have there be enough illumination for them to get a sense of what that product is doing, and to show it off in its best light, right? So somebody who designs department store lighting will be very keen on knowing how many foot candles of light are present in the volume of space they're going to decorate with clothing racks and, you know, different furniture and architecture, and how much they might need to put in order to enhance certain areas in the room, create focal points, right? There might be a reason why, in, for instance, there was a couple of stores, maybe American Apparel, but there's been stores like that, where you walk in and it's kind of dimly lit, and yet there'll be like certain racks of clothes, and maybe they're the racks that are for sale clothes that happen to be in a very convenient pool of light, right? And so when you're walking through that store, there'll be shadowy areas and then there'll be pools of light over certain racks, and you walk over there and you go, oh, it's 75% off, and you start really looking and hammering through there for a really good looking sweater or whatever, right? And they have led you subconsciously to that spot in the store. They've created a focal point and they've drawn you right to it by using the lighting to their advantage. So I just wanted to go back and show you now. Imagine what this candle is doing, this one candle on all these different folks, right? 1 foot candle in a volume of space and what it's doing. And so we use this benchmark as a calibration for our light meters. So our light meter will calculate how many foot candles are either available in a space or coming out of a fixture, projecting out of a fixture. And then it will take that foot candle information, and based on the ISO we're using for our camera, it will convert the foot candle information into exposure information relevant to apertures, frame rates, and ISO for us to plug those values into our camera. Okay. So that's basically what your light meters are using to help you determine what proper exposure is for your camera. So now I want to talk to you about where the inspiration is coming from and show you some examples from similar eras in time. This is 1630. This is The Man in Armor by Van Bielert. And what I found particularly striking about this image was how a guy in 1630 who doesn't even have the benefit of an electric light bulb knows how light and highlights particularly work on subjects with shiny surfaces. So here's a guy in polished armor, and he's under some kind of light source, probably a torch or, a candelabra hanging from the ceiling. And look at all of that detail that's revealed in his armor and all that highlight that he was able to render in the surface of that armor with oil paints. Absolutely amazing. The notion that these folks, without the benefit of photography, without film and cameras and lighting and all of the things that we take for granted now, this individual really understood the interplay of light on surfaces and how light interacts with smooth surfaces, with textured surfaces, with metallic surfaces, with wood, with feathers, with textile, and could render that effectively using brush and paint. It's some amazing detail, and it really looks photo accurate, certainly does to my eye. The little, I don't know what you call that, like filigree or whatever that piping is that, coils into a circle on his shoulder blade there, and then the flexible panels on his arm and all of that intricate detail. And each one of those facets has its own highlight in it, reflecting back at the camera. And so we can apply that same inspiration. And here's a modern example. This is Pete Shishitsky. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, this isn't Gilbert Taylor. Gilbert shot the first Star Wars movie. This is Peter Shishitsky from The Empire Strikes Back. But more importantly, look at C-3PO. I mean, how much does he remind us of the Man in Armor from, so here's 1977, shot in 1975/76, and here's 1630, right? The media has changed. This is celluloid. This is oil on canvas, right? One guy's using candle power. The other guy's using whatever he had at his disposal. And there's several different color values in here. So it looks like it's a combination of maybe HMIs and incandescent. Here's the Suicide of Cleopatra from 1621. This is Gio Barberi. And I don't know if you guys know the story of the suicide of Cleopatra, but she was found out. She had it going on the side with Mark Antony. Mark Antony was part of a coalition of people that were going to try and overthrow the emperor of Rome. And so she gets caught and she gets condemned to death, and she gets condemned to death by bite from an adder. And so, or I guess she's condemned to death and she chooses to be bit by an adder. She decides that she'll determine the time and the date of her departure, and so she allows herself to be bit by a snake. You can kind of see the snake coming out of the basket in her right hand there. But so that's the drama of the story. That's kind of what's going on there. Is, I'm not a historian, so I'm doing the best I can, but that's essentially what it is, right? She's going to die. She's getting bit by the snake. She had a bad deal. She got caught having an affair. Look at the lighting on her. So you remember what I said about half lighting? Can you see that she looks pretty much like she's being half lit right here for sure. So what does a half lit subject represent to us psychologically? Anybody, just shoot it out there, fire it out there.
Her mind is split between two things.
She's conflicted. What is she conflicted about? Who knows? Maybe I shouldn't have slept with Mark Antony. Maybe I shouldn't have, maybe I shouldn't have betrayed my real husband, or why did I marry that guy in the first place? I could have been happy with the other guy, or gosh, I wish we didn't get caught. Who knows? But essentially, it represents the drama of her internal conflict, right? If we'd lit her really beautifully and full and bright and so forth, do you suppose it would support the same mood of, oh shucks, I just got caught with my hand in the cookie jar? I don't think so. I think that broader, brighter lighting is reminiscent of or inviting of a feeling of sort of happiness and lightness, lightheartedness, and openness, right? Comedy is very often broadly and brightly lit for those reasons. The fact that her contrast is very high, the shadows are very dark, the transition lines are very sharp, and she's half lit, that speaks to the drama of her situation, I think. And therefore it might not be the prettiest light to render a female lead character, but it's certainly accurate if we want to get the tone of her situation correct, which is dire, right? So this might be the justification for using this kind of sort of brutal light on a female character, right? On the other hand, here's The Godfather. So, how many of you have not seen The Godfather? A fair number. I can only see a few of your thumbnails in my presentation mode. So we know, is The Godfather a good guy or a bad guy? In general terms, is he a good guy or a bad guy?
He's an anti-hero.
Yeah. Well, okay. He's certainly a patriarch, and he certainly has a duality about his nature. And that is, of course, by design. So the filmmaker is purposely trying to create conflict in the mind of his audience. Is this guy a good guy or a bad guy? Well, on one hand, he's the head of a crime syndicate, and he's certainly capable of murder. In fact, in this scene, the man on the left has come to ask for the Don's assistance in avenging the rape of his daughter by asking the Don to send men to go kill the two boys who raped his child. So the Don is certainly capable of that, but on the other hand, he is also a husband and a father with grandchildren. And on this particular day, in this particular scene, outside the house in the backyard, his eldest daughter is getting married. And so we have this character we're seeing in two different lights, if you will, and two different sides of the same character. In this room, in this moment, the man on the left, Bolsonaro, I think is his name, has come and asked the Don to do something shady. And the Don's thinking about it. And the Don's going, well, if I do this thing for you, you're going to owe me. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but I'll come to you at some point in the future, someday, and I'm going to ask you to repay me this favor. This is a transaction now that's happening, which means, okay, yeah, the Don's, he's capable of being kind of a bad guy because he's cutting a deal, and the deal is I'm going to go mess up the two dudes who raped your daughter, right? So the light is coming from high above. It's almost a single sort of contrasty source funneling down towards the floor, and it's creating those deep eye sockets. It's creating a top to bottom transition, which is sort of unusual. And so there's a strong jaw shadow. There's a shadow under the nose. The cheekbones are coming in full. The eyes are deeply socketed with big raccoon eyes, right? And this is what I call a death mask sort of looking lighting. It has, symbolism in it of danger, evil, death, not good stuff, right? And that comes from sort of a contrasty, hard directional top light with no fill coming from the floor. And the only light we really see in the room to justify the way this is lit at all is a lamp on the backside in the background over the Don's right shoulder. Other than that, we don't really see anything else in the room. There's a window that's been shuttered off over to the Don's right. And then presumably there's some kind of fixture above their heads that is, doing this, but we don't see it. We don't, have any sense of it other than what it's doing to these two guys standing in the middle of the floor. I titled this frame The Prince of Darkness because Gordon Willis, who was the cinematographer of this film at the time, when the studio execs looked at the rushes or the dailies from this movie after this scene was shot, they all freaked out. They said, this is too dark. The audiences won't be able to see what's going on. All we can do is hear their voices. Everybody's a silhouette. Why is this so dark? And they were really worried about it. But as the movie unfolded and they started seeing other scenes that were lit with the same kind of logic, they started to understand that the lighting had context to the story. It was a non-communicative way of the DP showing you the quality of these men and whether they were good or evil by the fullness and brightness of their key light. It was really groundbreaking stuff in 1972, and it has affected cinematographers profoundly ever since. Here's something reminiscent of that kind of lighting. This is A Girl with a Letter, and it is by Rotari from 1755. So we looked at Martha rebuking Mary, and we made some assumptions about Mary. Do you remember what they were? So Martha was getting hit full in the face with her light, and Mary was in shadow, right? And we decided that Mary was guilty of something. We don't know what. And she was getting scolded by Mary, who was fully lit. So now we have this young woman here, and she's got kind of a lazy, sort of dreamy look on her face. And there's a light source that's illuminating her. We're getting lots of texture and we're seeing shape. The dress, all the folds in the dress have very interesting contrast. The sculpt of her shoulder and her arm. She's seated at a desk. She's got a quill and paper. She's writing, but her face is turned away from the light source. What assumptions can you make about this lighting given this lighting scenario?
Or about her character because of the lighting.
What kind of letter is she writing? Now, we've also had color theory, so you can draw on things like that when you make your assessment or analysis of this image. What color is her dress?
It's kind of orangey red. So
what does red indicate?
Passion, anger. So it's probably like a love letter.
There you go. Probably a love letter. Now, here's the interesting thing. She's turned away from her light source, so her face is in shadow. What do you suppose the assumption is you can make about that? What kind of love is it?
Forbidden love.
Forbidden love, the kind of love that lurks in the shadows, right? Just like the Don making deals to beat dudes up in the dark. It's bright day outside, but he's in his den in his house with the windows shuttered, only one light on in the room, and he's making a secret deal to go beat some guys up for raping a girl. The thing, the seedy underbelly of the crime world, right? Those things that happen outside of society, outside of the norms and laws and folkways of our community, the deeds that lurk in the shadows, right? Bad stuff. And then we got this young lady writing a letter and she's turned away. Well, she's probably not going to go kill anybody. So the red probably doesn't mean anger in that sort of passionate sense. It's probably a love letter, and it's probably forbidden love because it's a love that doesn't get to, come out in the light of day. It exists in the shadows. So this is all context for the lighting that you can impose on the lighting setups. You got a script or whatever, and you're shooting it, rather than simply rush in and apply a broad, common sort of meaningless lighting scenario. You can start thinking about how shadows and highlight and the way they interplay can also help you tell that story, and then maneuver your lights to support that that feeling you're looking for, and do what we call hunting and pecking around if you have to. Move lights around until you find the right angle, and then build everything around that key angle, that first light. Here's a good one. Softer transition. Deep contrast, though. The background's not getting any light. The guy behind her is getting very little bit of light. Okay. She's getting pretty nice, soft, sort of non-directional key light. Good transition. Deep shadow on her left side. This is Jordan Cronenweth from the original Blade Runner, 1982. And I think it's more reminiscent of Rotari here. If we look at these two images, in this image, the girl's writing about forbidden love. In this image, what is Sean Young trying to hide? She has a secret. She's not really half lit, because that's not the point of this party that she's at. Do you guys remember this scene in Blade Runner? It's in the beginning of the movie. Harrison Ford goes to the, what's the name of the company? He goes to the headquarters of the company that makes the robot people. He's looking for some other guys that escaped from a mining colony, and he thinks they might have returned back to Earth. So he goes to the original manufacturer, and he's asking questions, you know, because he's trying to apprehend these two escaped replicants, they call them. And at the party, the patriarch of the company introduces Sean Young's character to the group, kind of like the debutante being introduced to society at the party, right? And so she circulates amongst all the people, and she's talking to everybody, and people are commenting about her dress and how beautiful she is, right? So the lighting is deceptively beautiful on her, and yet very contrasty, and her shadows are very dark. So, but she's not half lit, but she has a dark side to her. And the secret that she's withholding from the audience is, does anybody know?
Isn't she one of the replicants?
She's a replicant. She's a replicant. So she's being introduced to the people at this party so that they can judge for themselves whether they think she's real or whether she's a robot. And they don't know the answer. All they know is they meet this entity and they decide for themselves, is she convincing as a young debutante, or is she just a really well-made replicant? So I think it's the same kind of reminiscent lighting as what we have here. We're hiding something, so we don't want the images to be too broad and bright. It's a beauty key because that's the deception, right? If she's truly beautiful, could she possibly be a robot, right? No robot would be this gorgeous in real life. Surely she's a real person, you know? Here's a self-portrait by Mary Bouillard from 1785. Full in the face, no Rembrandt key here, right? This is a beauty light, right? It's right over the top of the lens. You can see the highlight from the light source in her eyes, reflecting back at us. The shape of the face is defined by the cheekbone and the chin. It's very heart-shaped, very feminine shaped because of the position of the key light. It's not off to one side, creating a golden triangle. It's equally balanced right over the lens so that the cheekbones are symmetrical. Part of the psychological aspects of beauty perceived by the onlooker is the symmetry of the face, right? And the hierarchy top to bottom, creating the angular heart-shaped structure to the jaws and cheekbone, right? This is beauty lighting, classic beauty lighting from 1785, again, without electric lights. And here's something reminiscent of that kind of lighting from 1989. Barry Sonnenfeld in Harry Met Sally. It's much broader and more open because it's a comedy. And in this scene, I think it's the scene where she does the orgasm in the sandwich shop. So she's talking with this guy she really likes, who's been her friend since her early days in college. And they meet from time to time, and they have lunch and they talk and they have a good time. And yet they never seem to come together as a couple. And so the whole comedy is, will they or won't they? Will they or won't they, over the course of several decades? And in this particular scene, I think they've graduated from college and it's been like 10 years since they've seen one another and they're catching up and so forth. And so Billy Crystal, who plays Harry, is kind of seeing her with new adult eyes. And, you know, so we see her as this beautiful, young, developing woman who's coming into her own. And it's also a comedy, so we don't want really deep, dark, penetrating shadows. It just kind of goes against the grain of the tone of the film. But again, there's no real stark, distinctive directional key, is there? It's coming from a beauty position. The highlight is in her eyes fully. That highlight denotes vitality, health, you know, intelligence, right? Seeing the highlights in the eyes. Balanced key light and a very high level of fill light. We're going to talk about that in a minute to lower the contrast in the image so there's not a lot of hard shadows on her face. Here's the opposite. The Countess de Keller by Alexander Cabanel, 1873. Arguably, you could say this woman is Rembrandt lit and in a very masculine way. And if I was to take a female character and light her in a masculine way, what might I be trying to tell you about that individual without coming out and saying it? In 1873, what's the cultural hierarchy in society? Favoring men or favoring women?
Men.
1873, it's a man's world, right? 1873, you light a woman and paint her portrait with masculine lighting. What are you trying to tell people about the Countess de Keller?
That she's empowering.
She's a powerful, powerful woman, right? If we gave her this kind of lighting, do you think anybody would respect her if she was the head of her household, the master of her own fortune, owner of, I don't know, maybe owner of slaves, owner of a lot of employees who work on, you know, at her company or business or whatever it is? She's in charge, right? But would you give her that kind of credit with that kind of lighting? Or would you give her a little bit more of a contrasty scenario there to indicate that this woman has more presence, more power than that? And then you can sort of see similar attitudes in this lighting. This is Black Swan. This is Maddie Lebetique. And has anybody not seen Black Swan? So in Black Swan, there's the two dancers, right? One is the beautiful ballerina type, and she's probably going to get the lead. And then you have the understudy / competition who really, really wants the role, but's probably not going to get it. Maybe she's not quite good enough. Maybe she's not quite aggressive enough, but she has a dark side and she's willing to do whatever she's got to do to get the role. And so we want to see this character in a more sinister light. So she's got the makeup over the eye, that's helping. But we've got the cheekbones happening, and we've got the shadows happening, and we've got the top light happening. It's not as stark as The Godfather, but it's the same. It's arguably the same kind of key light. It's very top motivated, right? So it's going to generate those top to bottom shadows. And then, of course, if she turns away from it, she's going to be in shadow, right? It has kind of the same hard qualities about it. It's not quite exactly, I think, how we would expect to see, you know, a character as beautiful as Natalie Portman rendered with lighting, right? But in this context, we're going to do what we call beating her up a little bit, giving her some harder lighting that sort of supports the idea that she's up to no good, right? And then here's Edward Hopper. This is a sense of a little bit more broader lighting scheme. So this is an environmental concept here. We have some central characters going on in the diner, but we just have this sense of the volume of space inside, the volume of space outside. It's in the evening, so the exteriors are street lit. We can see the shadows being scored on the sidewalk from the interior lighting, kind of, crisscrossing and conflicting on the sidewalk out through the window. Inside, everybody's kind of top lit, so it's kind of shadowy in there. And that might indicate that these people are, what do you think? Who hangs out in a diner at 2 o'clock in the morning and has coffee and, not many people. These,
Like criminals,
well, maybe criminals, but
like
I
party
mean,
people.
if we're making a broader assessment, we might say these are the people on the fringes of society, right? If you're part of the society model, right? You're married, you have a house in the suburbs at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're at home and you're in bed, right? The kids are in bed, the dog's in bed, everybody's in bed. Here in the urban environment, after hours, there's 3 people still in the diner. They all seem to be having coffee. There's one man alone and there's one couple there. And then there's a guy behind the counter that's catering to them, right? And you could almost get the sense that maybe these are the people that live on the edges of society. These are the people that are the afterthought. These are the people that exist in the time in between normal life, right? In the night hours. It's called Nighthawks. It has a very solemn feel to it, and it's really kind of open to your interpretation, I suppose. I mean, if you had some motivation for seeing this and thinking of it in a more positive light, I'd be interested in hearing it. And certainly your point of view isn't necessarily right or wrong. It's like whatever you do to support this image and whatever you combine in and around this image with other images of similar context kind of helps denote the style of your whole movie, right? As opposed to one frame. What does one frame tell us? Well, one frame doesn't necessarily tell us a lot. It can tell us a lot from your point of view, but it doesn't necessarily tell us the whole story. So it's going to depend on more than one frame to figure it out. But I think for the most part, this has kind of got some solemn notes to it. I have had some people say it has a very uplifting tone to it, in the sense that inside it's brightly lit and outside the shadows are there lurking, waiting for people to leave the restaurant. So in that context, I think you could find notes of sanctuary hidden in there, or safety. So, there's an argument to be made, I guess, both ways. The point is you decide, and then how do you treat the supplementary lighting when you go inside and shoot the action within the restaurant? Do you continue to support this idea of high contrast, or does it become a different message because you're inside under the lighting, right? But if you take the same kind of feelings that are sort of introduced into this image and apply them to Ex Machina. Has anybody seen this film? Do you know what's happening here? Something's happening here that's very similar to what's going on here. It's the same principle, in fact, by the same physicist who designed the AI protocols that this movie is dealing with specifically. In this scene, this young man, played by Domhnall Gleeson, comes in as a test subject for the AI robot on the left, and his purpose is to talk to her and decide whether or not she demonstrates true artificial intelligence or whether she's just replicating complex thought patterns. And so they sit down together, and they're separated by panes of glass, and she's in her apartments and he's in kind of an interrogation booth, and he's been told his mission is to determine whether or not she's a true AI. We don't know what her motivations are until later in the movie. But in this particular instance, it's the initial conflict between these two individuals, and he's trying to judge what she's all about, and she's trying to derive something from him, and we don't learn until later what that motive was. But I see the same kind of solemn tones here that I see here. Interestingly enough, she's in her own environment with rooms and a window to the outside, and he's in a cube. The only thing there is the door that he got in the cube with, and the door that'll lead him out into the hallway outside. Obviously, he's free to leave the cube and go outside the house and breathe the real air and feel the real sun on his face and smell the real trees. But her environment feels an awful lot more homey and open than his in this cube in this particular moment in time. And so the context of the shot is who's interrogating who. And it's just by the way you can perceive these two individuals and in their environment. Look at Domhnall Gleeson. How is he lit?
It's lit pretty dark, like big shadows on his face.
Does it remind you of Don Corleone?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, right? He's supposed to be the good guy, though. So what's up with that? And then she has a different kind of a light on her face. She's front lit, but from her point of view, from Domhnall's point of view, from our point of view, she's side lit. But when she turns into that source, we see the shape of her face. So we're already, look at her posture, right? She's sitting in a subservient position. Her eye line is below his. His eyes are in shadow, but her face is fully illuminated. And we can see the beautiful contour of her face. We see the shape of her body. She see the posture that she's in. Her hands are very subtly in her lap. Her legs are folded under, almost like, you know, a dog at his feet kind of notion, right? She's putting forth a certain kind of feeling, and he's just kind of sitting there all top lit and shadowy and judgmental. And she's sitting there all sort of innocent and curious, right? And that's kind of what that lighting is trying to get us to feel. I hope I'm not spoiling this for anybody, but later on in the film, and not too long after this scene, we determine that actually she is interrogating him to figure out how to escape from that room. And she's tempting him with what she knows to be her apparent beauty based on her knowledge of male responses and things. She's a computer. So she's already calculated what she's got to do to appeal to this guy on a very basic level. He falls right into the trap, hook, line, and sinker, right? And she ends up escaping from the lab where she was constructed, where she was built, right? So it's a very interesting flip-flop. The lighting is trying to get you to think and feel a certain way to lead you in a different assumption about the situation, so that then the story and the director can flip the script on you about 3 or 4 scenes later and give you a shocking interesting twist in the plot line, which will keep you sort of riveted to your seat, so to speak. So 3-point lighting is where we're going to start this whole process. So I've kind of gone through sort of a lighting analysis with you. I've given you the benefit of a conversation which can take on a much broader, deeper context, right? It's a rabbit hole that goes on almost forever, that conversation about interpretive lighting and what things mean and color and contrast and all of this stuff, right? But we got to start somewhere. Just like we start with the foot candle in terms of exposure, we're going to start with 3-point lighting in terms of just how do we get this whole thing in motion. So there's 2 schools of thought here. You can just take a camera and throw it on a tripod and walk into the room and point it in the direction of your actors, and whatever light's happening, just accept it and shoot it, right? But if you do that, then you haven't exercised any control or any dominion over your materials. So the whole notion behind cinematic lighting is going to be lighting that has been artfully controlled in such a way that it can communicate non-verbally to an audience the same tones and the same moods and feelings that the performance is showing the audience and the dialogue is informing the audience, right? And the combination of those three things give us, cinematic, dramatic exposition, right? So what are the lights involved? It says 3-point lighting. That sounds like 3 lights, and it is. It's 3 lights, possibly 4 lights, and I'll explain to you what the 4th one is. But here's a very basic graphic giving you some idea of what the 3-point lighting scheme is going to sort of look like. It's a sort of a 3D in space, almost bird's eye view. We got a young lady in the center of the shot. We got a camera indicated with the label. We see a line that says 45 degrees off axis from the relationship between the camera and the girl, right? So 45 degrees off axis to the lens. And then the key light is 45 degrees down angle towards the girl. So it's above her eye line, right? And it's up full at 100%. And that's the basic starting position for your average key light. So in the 3-point approach, the key light is going to do some very interesting things. I already mentioned this to you. This is my lighting demo that you can see on YouTube. The links are on web courses. You can also use these. I put the PDF on web courses for you in your downloadable PDF section. Okay, if we could look at that scenario, the same thing I just showed you, the blue image. Now we're looking straight down at the lighting scheme. Okay, we got the camera icon at the bottom. It's pointed directly at the bullseye. That's the subject in the center. The key light you can see is off at like 7:30, 45 degrees off angle from the camera. Okay, that dotted cross represents 4 quadrants of 90 degrees. Half of 90 degrees is 45 degrees. Okay, 45 degrees off axis from the lens. That's where we start with our key light. And it can be either from the left side of camera or the right side of camera. I always say dealer's choice. What do you prefer? Sometimes an actor will come to you and say, can you favor my left side? I look better from the left side. Or can you favor the right side for similar reasons, right? Maybe they got a mole or something that if you're going to have shadows, they'd rather the mole was on the shadow side. Could be anything, right? A birthmark, whatever. So it really doesn't matter what side you put your key light unless you've already established where certain lights are in the context or the geography of the set you're working in. If you've already established a prevailing light source like a window, it might look odd for your key light to come from a point in space opposite something as obvious as a big bright window. So in cases like that, you might want your key light to come from a certain side of camera based on things that are happening in that environment. But if we're just talking about a black box in limbo and you're starting from scratch, left or right, doesn't matter, 45 degrees off axis from the lens, that's where we start. All right. Mirror image to that is our fill light. A fill light is usually half the intensity of the key light. So if the key light is up full, the fill light's going to be up about 50%. And the reason why is to establish a ratio, 2 to 1. The key light is up full, the fill light is 50%. Okay, and therefore, whatever shadows are created by the key light in its position, the fill light's going to go in and fill in the contrast at half the intensity of the key. And then from there, you can make it dimmer or brighter based on how much contrast you want on the face of your actor or actress. Does that make sense? And then we're going to talk about a hair light here in a couple minutes. All right, the necessity that underpins the entire 3-point lighting method is that cinematography seeks to render 3-dimensional subjects in a 2-dimensional medium. That's very important to remember. Shapes, textures, colors, volume, size, tone, all these things are governed by the careful placement of the light sources. The sources reveal each of these characteristics in a variety of ways, each informing the audience of the state of the subject populating the frame. Your key light, your fill light, your edge light, and then your background light. That's your possible fourth light. 3 lights for the subject, 1 light for the background. Okay. The key light's the most important light in a 3-point lighting scenario. Without it, our subject wouldn't have the adequate illumination to establish basic shape, volume, color, or texture of skin or clothing. Placement of the key light can have demonstrative effects on the narrowness or the fullness of the face. Front light makes the face look wider, side light makes the face look narrower. Okay. A position perpendicular to our frame of reference renders a thin quality to the face. That's half light. When searching for the perfect key light position, start from either side of the camera, 45 degrees off axis to the lens, and slightly above eye level, which tends to also be about 45 degrees. If this looks good to you, then you're done with your key light placement. If it doesn't, start to move the key light around towards the side of the subject and notice how the shape of the face will emerge as the light approaches the optimum angle. So there's going to be an angle that's really going to show you the best shadow structure versus the shape and contour of the face. And when you find that spot, it's like bang, you'll look and you'll see it happen and you're like, perfect, stop right there. And it's different for everybody. Some people look better with their key light out to the side. Some people look better with their key light above the lens. Some people look good with their key light low and off to one side or high and off to one side. It really all depends on the structures of the face, and everybody's face is more or less different. So you're going to have to figure out best key placement for everybody that you're going to shoot, and then try to accommodate all of those individuals in your movie. That's where part of the skill of a cinematographer comes in. Okay. If you close down the angle of the key light and bring it around more to the front of the subject, the result's going to be a flatter image with fewer shadows to define any of the surface features. And that's that front light that we want to avoid. This is a quick graphic that shows you as the key light changes position from full in the front to around at a Rembrandt angle and around further to side light, how that face on the shadow is going to start emerging and developing into a full transition line right through the bridge of the nose. Classic Rembrandt lighting basically looks like this. One source at the optimal angle to give you a nice transition line off of the low side. So you're going to have a highlight side of the face and a low side with a transition. And on that transition side, you're going to have the golden triangle right under the low side eye. That's exactly what we have here. Under the left eye, we have the highlight from the key source. And under the right eye, we have the golden triangle. And then we have the transition line happening right across the cheekbone. This defines the shape of the face. It gives us nice overall illumination. And it'll also give us a little bit of texture because it's coming not from completely in front and also not completely from the side, but it's coming from enough of an angle to get what we call relief across all of the surfaces of the face. So the eyelashes, the pores, the lips, the bangs and the hair are all going to have a nice sort of textured appearance to them because of the angle of the light. If we apply this to our cinematic lighting, we can see how it can happen in a number of different contexts. Here is Rembrandt lighting on Anthony Hopkins. This is Legends from the Fall, Legends of the Fall. DP is John Toll, won Academy Award for this cinematography. Here is Hugo. This is Bob Richardson, 3-time Academy Award winning DP. His key light is defining more of the shape of Hugo's face. He's given Hugo a kinder, gentler contrast, I think. Look at the contrast on Tony Hopkins here. He's angry right now. He's angry at the men who have come to his house and to convince his eldest son to run for public office. And all he wants is his sons to come home and live a peaceful, tranquil life on the ranch in Montana, away from politics, away from war, away from all of the rumblings of dissatisfaction that are going on the East Coast in the 1880s. Okay. He's mad, and his lighting, I think, reflects that. He's got a deep shadow off to one side, indicating that there are parts of his past that he would better off leave behind, right? And there's somebody that is threatening that tranquility right now. In this shot, Hugo's very innocent, right? He's learning about certain things for the first time. He's very impressionable. He's very young, and therefore, uncharacteristically of a young actor, by the way, young actors generally get more frontal and flatter lit because of their youth and their innocence. And we don't want to try to inject any mood or tone into the lighting of a young individual. But in this case, I think it's really more of a beauty because he's a male character and not a female character and very young. Bob gave him a bit of a mature key light, but I think it worked out okay because it's kind of full and warm in color. And it's at a point where Hugo might possibly be in a little bit of danger if he doesn't make the right choices. So it might be appropriate in this case anyway. He's a 3-time Academy Award-winning DP, so he's probably has some insight onto that. And therefore it denoted his choices. But this is very certainly a Rembrandt key on a very young man in a movie, 3D movie, by the way. And here's Newton Thomas Siegel. This is Three Kings. So we've got a practical light in the background. In other words, a light that we see on camera that also might perform some function in our lighting scheme. Okay, there's a work light right behind him. Okay, and the key light is, okay, so George is not looking at the camera. If he were looking at the camera, the position of that light that's lighting his face would be a half light. He'd be half lit and half in shadow. But he's turned away from the lens, isn't he? So when he turns away from the lens and turns into that light source, it almost takes on a Rembrandt angle again, because he's turned the geography of everything sort of 45 degrees from the lens. Okay. When we do that, and the camera is seeing our subject from the shadow side, we start developing a key that's almost more of a side light or an edge lit key. And that is going to give us the most texture in the surface that we're lighting up. And in this case, it happens to be Clooney's, what do you call it? Is his stubble, right? And the expressions that he's got on his face right now, which are kind of sort of being let down and angry because he knows that he's about to leave Iraq. And he knows where millions of dollars are hidden in a cave, and he wants to go get it. And he's being told that he's got to get on a plane and get out of country here pretty quick. And he wants to figure out how to get the money and get away at the same time. And it's this big heist movie that happens in the aftermath of Desert Storm 1. Okay, the fill light. We talked about the key light. The key light is our main source of illumination. It creates shape, texture. It can denote tone and color of our subjects, and it can start introducing the feeling of the theme or the mood of the performance or the situation determined by the script. The fill light, on the other hand, plays a supportive role for the key light. Once we've achieved the desired key quality, our subject is adequately shaped and illuminated. Now we have to decide on the level of overall contrast for the image. The more contrast we create when lighting the subjects, the more mood we can evoke, okay? So images with a high degree of shadow are viewed as mysterious or negative in connotation, and the opposite would be images with less contrast, brighter shadows, more open shadows, and those renderings imply lightheartedness, happiness, love, awareness, knowledge, right? So fill light is very important, and it plays a supplementary role to our key light. And it's used in both photography and videography to not change the character of the key light. So whatever tone the key light has established, the role of the fill light is just to then determine the degree to which we feel that meaning or that mood. Okay, and the fill light may be used to adjust the contrast of the scene to match the dynamic range of the recording media as well. So some cameras don't do well in low light. So if you have a tendency to create images with your lighting that have a lot of shadows, you might want to use a high level of fill so you don't get as much noise in your shadows in your images if the camera is very poor at gathering light out of areas of the shot that don't have any foot candles represented there, right? Certain cameras don't do well in shadowy sets. Other cameras do very well in shadowy sets. It really depends on which brand and which model we're talking about. So controlling contrast is the major intention of the fill light, controlling contrast. And you can see I've indicated with arrows here where these moments of low contrast are being created with our fill light. Here's the two kids on the deck of the Titanic, and they're all falling in love for the first time, and they're trying to figure out how to ditch the stuffy rich guy, and they can run away together. And she's saying, "Man, you don't have any money, and I got this good thing going on. Why should I go with you?" Right? And so they're in a very interesting moment. But we want to see her in a pleasant, inviting light, right? She is the prized betrothed to this really wealthy guy who's on board the boat. But she's also the subject of Leonardo DiCaprio's character, who has fallen, utterly in love at first sight with her while he's on the boat strolling around one day. So low contrast in Kate's image is promoting this sense of beauty and inviting possibility. And then she's got that warm sunlight hitting her from the natural sunlight, which is just creating this warm, sort of lovey feeling. Like, why wouldn't you want to be in love with this girl? Why not? Look at her. She's beautiful, right? And this is what that lighting is trying to say. It's like telling the audience, wouldn't you do the same thing? Wouldn't you feel the same way? And here he is, right? He's half lit from the actual sun. So in order to keep him from looking conflicted, even though he kind of is, right? His level of fill is very high so that the shadow side of his face is not dark and not giving the audience the wrong idea about this dude. Like, yeah, he's got some stuff to hide. What's he hiding? He's poor. He doesn't have any money. So he's rooming downstairs in steerage while she's staying in a nice suite above deck, right? That's what he's hiding. He's hiding his financial status. He's not hiding any bad intentions towards the girl. He's just not as well equipped as her fiance, who's really wealthy. But there's 3-point lighting happening in this shot too, and I wanted to point that out to you, and I wanted to see if you could figure out what the 3 sources are. I haven't spoken about the edge light yet. But there's at least 2 of the 3 lights working in this shot right now that we have talking about. There's a key light working and there's a fill light working. I'm showing you right now where the fill light is working by following that arrow. What source is the key light?
The sun.
It's the sun. And the fill is created either by redirecting some of the sunlight with a white foam board, maybe, or there's a white bulkhead right next to Leo out of frame left, where the sun is reflecting back off. That could very well be coming just from the side of the boat, or it could be both. It could be light hitting the side of the boat and reflecting back, and a reflector up close to get as much fill light into that low side as possible, so it balances nicely with the hard sunlight. And then the third light is an edge light, and it's happening by the very presence of the bright sky behind Leo. The fact that the sunset happening in the background behind Leo is helping to separate Leo from the background, and it's bringing him right up into the foreground. Okay, and that's part of the job of the edge light, which is kind of the next thing I want to talk to you about. You see here, this is a frame from Schindler's List. So this is Janusz Kaminski working for Steven Spielberg, and you see the highlight in oh, Jesus, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank. In his hair, we got a rim light going on here, right? And his fill light looks like sort of redirected light that maybe is bouncing off the wall in the background. And then his shape, the shape of his face is really being defined by light that's bouncing up off the tablecloth. They're in a restaurant right now. This light is bouncing off the tablecloth and it's giving shape and texture to Liam Neeson's face. So by definition, if it's creating shape and texture and showing dimension or volume to his face, then the key light in this situation is the light bouncing off the tablecloth. And then his rim light is his hair light, and the fill is whatever light's bouncing off the wall and filling in the shadows that would have happened on the right side of his face. Now, her lighting scheme is using some of the same sources, but it's slightly different. Her key light is also Liam Neeson's hair light. Do you see that? The light that is separating Liam Neeson from his background is also showing the shape and texture of, I forget the character's name in this. It's showing the shape and texture of her face. Elsa, I think. She's also getting light reflected off of the tablecloth, but it's not shaping her face the way the high contrast edge light from Liam's hair is shaping her face. So from her point of view, her key light is that high light coming from behind, and her fill light is the light bouncing up off the tablecloth. Her key light is also her rim light. So she's really lit with a 2-point lighting scheme, and Liam Neeson is lit with a 3-light scheme. Can you see that happening? Does it make sense? All right, the rim or the edge light. The rim light, edge light, it also goes by the term kicker or cheeker, right? This is an important contributor to the 3-point established lighting scheme. It shows texture and shape of the subject, not like the key light, but it kind of defines the full profile of a character against the background. And the key phrase here is against the background. So what a rim light is really doing is creating separation between the shape of the subject in the foreground and whatever's happening in the background. Okay, a rim light is generally positioned directly or nearly fully directly behind the subject. It's often rigged up high overhead to avoid being seen in the shot and to reduce the potential for lens flares, because it's coming at a real steep angle that potentially could hit the front of the lens and cause a lot of flares and ghost images and stuff to appear in the image. Depending on the steepness of the angle coming from behind the subject, the edge light might appear broad and soft or thin and hard. The degree to which is up to you based on its true position. So the further and more directly behind the subject your backlight is positioned, the thinner that line of separation will be. And as you bring that light around towards the front, that line of separation will get wider, whichever side you're coming around on, okay? So from back here around to my right side, this side of the edge light will start to get wider on the side of my face, okay? And you can control that. And it's controlled, it's all according to your taste, okay? The degree of which is up to you. The edge light functions by the physical laws of reflectivity. So it's a reflected angle. If the light is in the background, skipping off the back of my head and then going right into the lens, it will appear to have greater intensity than maybe the key light, which is actually right here, big and full and soft on my face from the front. But because of the reflection angle, it's going to appear brighter than my actual key light. It'll have more spectral quality to it, okay? Here is an edge light that's also what we call a 3/4 back key light. So if it was all the way behind Sigourney Weaver, it would be a true backlight. But because we've started moving it around front, almost to a half light position, and she's turned her look away from the lens, it's now acting like the same kind of key that we hit George Clooney with a few frames ago. It's called a 3/4 back key light. And you can see how most of her face is in shadow to the camera lens. So she's a razor thin line that defines the shape of her face. We can see just enough of her low side eye and her high side eye and the expression on her face to know that she's, you know, she's in shock or she's angry, right? And we can see the shape of her mouth. We can see the line of her chin, the structures of her neck. We can see all the shape and texture that we would need to see from a key light. And so therefore it qualifies as a key light by definition, but it's also coming from slightly behind her. So it also fulfills some of the definitions of a backlight. So it's a 3/4 back key light, 3/4 behind her. Here's some similar stuff, although right here, Brad looks to be more half lit. He's lit from the practicals, the tubes, the fluorescent tubes hanging in the ceiling over what was a pool table, and they slide it out of the way to have Fight Club. And look at the quality of his edge lighter, his cheeker on the opposite side. It's coming from another source, probably another hanging fluorescent somewhere else in the room in the background. It's not as bright as his key light, which is being motivated by the closest fluorescent to the foreground off to his left, our camera right? And so the shape of his face is what I call bookended. He's got a key light coming from one side, which terminates almost like a half light at his nose. And then he's got a kicker or a cheeker or a backlight happening on the other side to finish the shape of the head and separate him from the background. And then he's got a big sort of dark stripe on the low side of his face. That's the contrast. No fill, heavy contrast. Why do we want to light Brad this way in Fight Club? What does anybody know this movie? To know the character that he's playing? Have you guys seen Fight Club?
Spoilers or no spoilers?
Spoil it, baby.
So this is actually the guy that's in Edward Norton's mind, but he projects it outwards because of, I guess, some mental disorder that he has. As like the chaotic, not shy version of him.
Yeah, and he usually gets Edward Norton's character in some kind of trouble, doesn't he?
Yeah, 100%.
So he's a bad guy, more or less.
Pretty much.
So he's got no fill light, right? The less fill light, the better, because if we want real dramatic contrasty light on a character, we're trying to tell the audience that he's either rugged and ready for action, or he's a bad guy who might be equally rugged and equally ready for action, but his motivations are not pure, right? If your motivations are pure, you might have more fill light, or you might have a bigger, softer, fuller key light, or your edge light might look more angelic, right? So you can take all these tropes and all these traditional sort of stereotypes and chauvinisms and dial them into your lighting to signal to the audience, this is not a good guy. This is a bad guy. It's okay to feel that way. Look at him, you know? Here's what we call a split key. And so it consists of two opposing sort of equally bright lights with equal hardness or softness, whatever you prefer. And they're directly opposing each other in the frame. One is acting like an edge light and the other is acting like a key light for two looks that Keanu Reeves is going to give on either side of the camera. He's going to look over here at what is it, Bull that's running the boat, and he's going to look over at Trinity, and he's going to look up at Morpheus, right? And whichever way he looks, the lights switch roles. If he looks this way, this light is his key light and the other light is his edge light. If he looks this way, the edge light now becomes his key light and the other edge is now playing the other light is playing the role of his edge. They're both the same intensity and softness and proximity. So it's really a split key for what we call a split look. He looks one way, then he looks the other way, right? And then this is the double back cross. This is a fairly classic way of handling, if not one person, two people in the same frame that are looking profile to camera, and maybe they're splitting their looks to the lens and away from the lens, right? We've got an edge light happening, and then we've got a fuller edge light happening. One is a little bit thinner, one is a little bit fuller, so that it looks like a key light from one direction, and from the other direction, the lights will switch roles, kind of like the Schindler's List shot I showed you a few minutes ago. The double back cross, the left edge is thicker than the right edge, or vice versa, and comes around more quickly to the side to provide a key styled shape for a profiled subject, while the other edge is completing the boundary of the shape of the head against the background. Okay, so this other edge light is separating the subject from the background. Otherwise, you'd have a dark black shadow on the backside of his head that's starting to blend with a dark black background. Then we don't know where the subject ends and the background begins. So we put in a little edge light in there to help define that for us. All right, so I want to show you, it's called Zvork. I don't know why. It's a French website, but it's an awesome tool. It's free for you to use, and it is on the internet, and I'm going to go to it. Actually, I want to get out of full frame mode now, and I want to go to the site. Nope, 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 nope. Let's just do it this way. I think I've already got it queued up over here. There it is. Virtual Lighting Studio. Looks like this. All right. So you're going to go to it, zvork.fr/VLS, Virtual Lighting Studio. Okay. But you can just punch this into Google, Virtual Lighting Studio, and it'll give you the link. Okay. So I've already initiated this. What I'm going to do is refresh it so you can see the top page. The top page is actually this banner right here, and it gives you this little sort of disclaimer. And then it tells you that you need Chrome to work for this to work best. And then it's got some social media links here. And then you press this button to start, and it'll take you into the app like this. These banners will stay unless you buy a version that then the banners will be taken away, and then you can save your work and stuff like that. But if you want to use it for free, you got to look at these ads off to the left and the right, which I don't think is any big deal. In fact, yeah, you can sort of magnify this if you want and get rid of some of it. All right, so we can pick an avatar, right? So you got this guy without hair. So you got bald guy, bald white guy with hair, white girl with hair, and then we got person of color with hair. I wish they had a female person of color with hair, so that you could see, because hair, especially long hair, plays sometimes a very important role in the types of lighting we can use on women because of the styling of their hair, right? Too much hair might get in the way of an edge light, or it might impair the total volume of a big soft key light. So we have to take the hairstyling into consideration when we're picking the quality of the key light that we want to shine on somebody. So if we just take, normal dude, right? And then we look at the geography of the virtual studio. So here's normal dude situated, in the middle of this volume of space. Okay. And then here's light number one. So light number one has got a green indicator. It's down here on this tab. Okay. If I unclick it, I've deselected it, and then I re-click it. Okay. And I have some things that I can do to it. I can move it with these buttons. I can make it, raise it or lower it, and I can change the intensity down here with buttons. But you can also just sort of, I believe you can drag it around in space, or you used to be able to. Maybe not. Okay. If I start moving it, I'm hitting this sort of arrow button here. You can see I'm moving it around to the side, or I can move it around to the front, and I can switch sides, right? So if I want to make a key light, where do I need to put this for a good key light starting position?
45 degrees to the left.
45 degrees to our left or his left?
Is right.
His
So,
right, our left. We would call that camera left. From the camera's point of view, move the light left. So tell me when to stop.
right there, I'd say.
Here, okay. That feels good. Now, let's see. Why can't I? Oh, there they are. Got more buttons hidden. Okay, so here we can raise the light and I can also lower the light. And then I can move it closer or further away. What do you want to do to this?
Raise it.
Let's raise it. Good idea. Let's go up. How much do you want to go up?
Yeah. Yeah, about there, and then more to our left.
Probably back it up. I think that's what happened is we're going to back it up. Now it's sort of up here. How's that look?
Yeah, that looks perfect, honestly.
Okay. And I think, yeah, that's what our key light in the current position, that's what it looks like. So what do we want? What do we want to do here? Is this a Rembrandt key?
Kind of.
Kinda. What's right? What's wrong?
We still need a second light to the right, our right.
How many lights do we have in the Rembrandt lighting scheme?
3. I believe. 1.
So what do we want to do? Is it in the right place for a Rembrandt key light? What should you be looking for?
The triangle on the cheek.
Yes, thank you. So in order to get that triangle on the cheek, what we might want to do is the light is over here off camera left. It's pretty high. Let's try lowering it 1 click. And then let's try moving it around back camera right a little bit and see what that gives us. Oh, that opened it up. So here's the triangle trying to happen right here. All right, but we got the nose shadow, which isn't quite reaching all the way over to the transition line. So the triangle is sort of broken open. All right, so we could try raising the light back up to see if that helps. Well, nah. That might be the best we're going to do in terms of a golden triangle in this scenario. Well, that's kind of doing it. All right. Let's see if I think I affected yeah, here's the intensity. This is what we call 0 EV. This is a good base exposure for your native ISO. Okay, whatever this f-stop is, we don't know. All we know is according to the exposure value, it's 0, meaning not too bright, not too dark. EV 0, right? So we'll start here. And then who mentioned a second light?
Me.
So what do you want? What kind of light do you want to add?
It would be 50% of the first one, and to our
50% of the first one sounds like what? That's a fill light.
Yes.
Let's add a fill light. So light number 2. Now, poof, it just turned on because there it is. It's right where the camera's coming from. So we got to move this guy. So where should we put our fill light in relationship to our key light?
I want to say like, yeah, whatever you were just gonna say.
Say that again.
To the right.
Camera right or subject to the right?
Camera right.
Camera right. All right, let's see what that did.
Maybe a little more.
little more.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's what we can try. You see how light number 2 is our fill light, right?
Yeah.
You see how it's 0 EV and our key light is 0 EV?
Hmm.
So this needs to be less bright than our key light. So let's go down 50%. Let's go down by -3 EV. I think is about 50%. Well, all right. If you have a light at 2.8 and you increase the brightness so that the lens now needs to become a 4, you've added twice as much light. If you decrease the amount of light by 50%, technically -1 EV would be 50%. But I don't think that looks like half of the key light. Maybe it's the reflected angle, whatever. But -1 EV isn't quite what we need. We need to go darker. So I think -3 was a good place to start with the fill light. What do you think?
I'd say that looks good.
I mean, we can go darker.
Maybe try like, yeah.
Here's -4,
I think -4 is almost too much.
almost too much. Okay, go back. Here's
Go
3.5,
I think that's, yeah, I think that's the best one.
3.5.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Okay, what else you want to do? Anything? Are we done?
That third light.
We need a third light, right? For 3-point lighting, we need a third light.
Yeah.
So what's that light called?
The hair light.
Or
The rim light.
the rim light. It's also the edge light, or I gave you 2 nicknames.
The backlight.
Backlight.
Let's not use backlight because it's too close to background light, which is a different light.
Yeah, true.
So it's an edge light, it's a rim light, it's a hair light. We also might call it a kicker or a cheeker. And the reason we call it a cheeker is because it puts a nice little highlight right about here on the cheek, and it separates the subject from the background. And a cheeker is generally a very subtle edge light, not a very bright, intense one. So if you were lighting a movie and the DP said, let me see a cheeker on the subject, you'd put a subtle edge light here. If he said, let me see a kicker, that would probably be a more crispy edge light, but in the same basic place, right along the jaw, right? And then an edge light would be something fuller and from more further behind, which gave us more of a sense of the whole shape of the head. All right, a cheeker and a kicker are really kind of just this section of the face. And on this guy, it's really from his ear and his temple down to about his, the base of his chin. So depending on where we add this third light, we're going to see, how we can adjust the intensity. Let's add a third light and boom, it's again, puts it right in front of the camera. So we got to move it now. So where do you want to put this edge light?
Like behind light number 2 on the right.
Deep in the background on the same side as light number 2, which is what we call on the fill side. Okay, so we've got key side and fill side. Give me an edge light deep on the fill side. Okay, so let's move this guy around. Do, 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 do. Tell me when to stop.
More to the.
Yeah, more.
There.
No, more to the camera left.
You should bring it back more though.
As a
Further
straight
from
backlight.
Further from the subject. No, like
Okay.
to the right and then further from the camera and the subject.
I think that's as far back as it'll go.
Okay, and then to the left, I'd say.
And then
That
to
way.
the left.
Yeah.
More this way?
No, the other one. Yeah, right
Thought it
there.
was supposed to be edgeway. On the
So
other-
now it's on the key side.
If we want it on the edge side, it has to go over there.
Yeah, let me show you an edge, a fill side edge, and then I'll show you a key side edge, and you're going to see there's a difference between those two edge lights. So let me go back over here where we were before. And I think we need to raise this up a little bit too. All right, now an edge light, because of the reflected angle, is going to look as bright as the key light. So that means that the edge light can technically be a fixture or a source that is not nearly as bright as the key light because it's at a different reflection angle. Okay, it's the difference between seeing a light that bounces off a wall and then bounces into your eyes, or a light that shines directly into your eyes. One of those lights is going to appear brighter because it's shining directly into your eyes instead of bouncing off the environment and reflecting into your eyes. And a backlight, by definition, if it's in the background pointing towards camera, is shining directly into your lens, directly into your eyes. So it is going to appear to be a much more intense or bright fixture. So in order to tone it down, we might use a smaller fixture or just dim this guy way down. But if you look at what it looks like in its current mode with the same intensity as the key, in the position that we have it, it's going to look like that. That's not too bad, actually. Let me move it a little bit around towards the, let's see. I'm going to move it towards the fill light, and you can see it get wider. See it get wider on the cheek? Here's the other thing you can do. Let's turn off the fill light for a minute and just look at what the edge light is doing. That's actually a pretty good spot. If we keep moving, whoops, the other way, it's going to disappear, and it's only down here on his shoulder at the moment until we keep going around, and then it'll start emerging on the key side of the face. The problem with it being on the key side of the face is it's only going to work for a brief moment, and then the intensity of the key is going to kind of drown it out. This is coming around front, and I'm moving around towards the fill side. You see those shadows changing? Just like the Sparkles and Wine video. I think the first position was the best for that edge light. Now, here's the thing you can do, right? How would this lighting scheme look if this dude had no hair? I don't know. Let's see. Bang. This is what his lighting scheme looks like without hair. And this is what the same lighting scheme would look like on a girl with long hair. Or person of color. Can you see how the color of the skin is going to change how these lights react on the subject's face? So you're going to have different lighting approaches depending on the color, texture, and color scheme of your subject. So blonde hair versus black hair versus brown hair versus red hair, white, yellow, black, brown skin tones are going to affect how your key light looks, right? Hard key versus soft key is going to look different on different individuals, right? So this is kind of a neat tool in that respect because it can not only teach you basic angles, and it's not perfect. I realize that it has some, some of the angles aren't exactly the best, but it gives you enough of an idea of where these lights need to be positioned. And then if you change to a different subject with a different kind of visual texture, it's going to teach you how to make adjustments in your lighting to accommodate those changes. So let's take a look at, let's see, for instance, let's move this key light around to more of a half key. And then what we're going to have to do is raise the level of fill and maybe bring it around to catch that low eye. This is going to have the key and the fill on the same side of the face, which is an interesting scenario that sometimes makes sense depending on the person and the quality of the face that we're looking at. And the edge light stays on its own on the opposite side. We could also turn that edge light off and see what happens if we just bring the fill light on the same side as the key light and we move the key light around more to the side. We can also move the key light back a click. See what happens. And I don't know, is this an appropriate lighting scheme? I don't know. I think it would depend on the situation. I think what we had going on before was a little bit more, shall I say, normal. It was more what we might expect to see in a scenario. You know, a little bit of fill, a nice shaped key light with, you know, a nice Rembrandt feel to it, and a sensible cheeker, not too bright, not too dark. So we have some nice separation against the black background on both sides, on the key side and on the edge side, right? And we got a nice balance and contrast on the face, nice shape on the face, defines the nose, defines the eyebrows, defines the shape of the chin, low contrast in the shadows. That by definition is a fairly adequate and standard 3-point lighting setup. Okay. But do we like it? I don't know. I don't really like fill that much. I don't use fill very often anymore, especially with digital cameras. If I turn that off, I have to decide what kind of key light's going to look good if I don't use any fill light. Where am I going to put that thing? I don't know. Here's a high key without any fill, and I got all these raccoon eyes. If I can go even higher, let's see. Here's Godfather lighting. If I add just a little bit of fill light, here's Godfather lighting right here. And we might do something about adding an extra backlight in here. Let's add a second backlight, and let's put it opposite from the one that's working at the moment. There's two edge lights, two opposing edge lights. I call that bookending also. It's also by definition a double back cross. If you look at the diagram, you see an edge light going this way and an edge light going that way, and they form an X. That is by definition a double back cross. Two lights happening from the background, converging at the subject, and then changing direction in the foreground. Double back cross. Okay. This high edge light in the very, very back, I don't know if it's really doing anything. Oh, that's the key light. Okay, I moved it a lot. Wow. Oh, it's a little bit now slightly behind. That's what it is. It's above and slightly behind the talent now. If I move it forward, now it's directly above the talent. So I put it slightly behind. There's your Godfather lighting right there. And this scheme shows you where the lights would have to be in space if this is the camera down here. Okay. So for your assignment, I would have you do this, play with it, get a look that you like with 3 sources, key light, fill light, and edge light, and then just take a screen grab of the surface. Try to include this if you can, you know, and turn it in as a JPEG in web courses. Okay. But I'd like you to play with this tool and get a feeling for it. For lack of a stage and, you know, our ability to meet face to face, and if I could put lights in your hand, it would make this sort of gel a lot quicker. So what I'd like to do is just see you play with this app and see what kind of results you can get from it. If you want, give me the one I asked for, a very nice, 3-point lighting setup, and then show me something radical that you prefer. And, we'll use that as a, maybe an opportunity for a discussion. Okay. In fact, I'm going to put that in the instructions of the assignment. You'll give me one well-placed 3-point lighting scheme, and then give me one radical departure from that scheme that you think looks better or that you prefer. And then we'll make that your assignment.
Do you want our 3-point to be Rembrandt?
Well, if you use a Rembrandt key, it's going to sort of happen pretty quick because the fill light's going to only be able to go in one place. I asked for a Rembrandt key in the beginning, but let's say this, a Rembrandt could be as few as one light, right? So if you show me a 3-point lighting scheme where your key light is a half light maybe, and your fill light is from the front, very, very, very low, and your edge is from the back, that's a 3-point lighting scheme, but it's with a half light key, not a Rembrandt key. And then as your option, show me just a Rembrandt key placement and what you would do. So show me how you'd use 3 lights, then show me how you'd use 2 lights. This won't allow, because it's a virtual space, there's technically nothing in the background, so I can't add a background light. In other words, I can't splash something on details in the background because there aren't any. But you can add up to 6 lights into this scenario. You got 5 and 6 unused over here. If you wanted to go really radical and see what 6 lights looks like for some reason, you could do that. But this is Virtual Lighting Studio. It's pretty fun. I think it's a beginner's application just to get you into the feeling of how bright is my key light, how bright is my fill light, where exactly in space do I want to put my edge light, what's the difference between half light and front light key look like, and it'll give you a pretty good sense so that at the very first opportunity you have to go into the lab and deal with the soundstage and the lighting we have out at campus and start playing around, you'll already have some sense in your mind where you want to put stuff. And we won't be starting quite from scratch when we go on stage, which would be a good jump on the Cinematography 2 lesson plan if you take it that far. Okay. So I have on web courses a tutorial. Where is it? Oh, it's in my presentation. If you go to the same place you go to see your lecture videos, I also have an explanation of how to use the Zvork lighting simulator if what I've showed you today is still not making any sense. But here's the link. And did I put it? I did not. Here's what we can do really quick. I'll put it. Oh, well, I already created the PDF. You can extract this from the PDF I already created of the keynote presentation and get it this way. But it's Zvork Virtual Lighting Studio. Just Google Virtual Lighting Studio and it'll be at the top of the search solutions. Okay, Virtual Lighting Studio. All right. But this is on my website if you want to check out how to use the simulator. I know what I can do with it. I can put it on the web courses page. Let's do that. Let's put it on your videos page. And I'll put it at the very bottom after my lighting simulation videos, okay? Where's the, oh. Got to get that button. There we go. Save. All right. Now it's there, and I'll send this to your colleagues on Tuesday night, which is section 3. So they have it as well. Now the tutorial on Zvork is on web courses for you. Okay. So that's it. That's the whole presentation in a nutshell. Your homework is I've given you some PDFs to read on your downloadable PDF page in web courses. And then check out the videos on your video page. And that's it, really. I also gave you that PDF of the lighting for film and television, the brown book. I haven't cited anything specific from this lecture out of this book. This book is mostly revolving around how to be a lighting technician and less about the aspects of creative lighting itself. There's only a little bit of one chapter dedicated to that. The rest of the book is dedicated to tools and techniques and things around being part of a lighting crew. But you can check this out. There's a little bit on creative lighting in here. The PDFs that I've selected for you, though, are very specific and they pertain to what I talked about today. So if you have any questions about that, you can shoot me an email. Okay. Otherwise, that's what I've got for you for today. So what do you think? What do you think about 3-point lighting? Any questions or anything any issues or observations you would like to bring up while we're all here?
If we have the resources and the ability to do so, can we like do it like take an actual picture with 3-point lighting, or do we have to use the simulator?
Do you have lights already?
Yes.
And do you have a normal, like a DSLR or a video camera?
Yes.
You can. I mean, how comfortable are you using those tools? Do you have them? Do you use them a lot? Is this something that you've already sort of explored on your own?
Yeah, I've been doing 2-point and 3-point lighting in different ways for the past couple of years now, for a bunch of interview shoots and other short films and stuff. So I kind of feel like I got a little grasp of what it is.
Okay. From the point of view of the software, I kind of know where you're at because I can see your plot.
Okay.
What I won't have is a lighting plot if you use your light. So what you would have to do is you'd have to supply me 2 images. One is your 3-point image, and then the other is your departure image, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And then you have to give me 2 diagrams. You have to give me a lighting diagram for the 3-point and then a lighting diagram for your alternate lighting solution. If you can do that, then I'll say, yeah, go ahead and do that and reference our conversation here during the lecture. So you're going to have to give me some kind of diagram that explains where your lights were.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sometimes I can tell and sometimes I can't. It depends on, how well you've done. If you've done really well, it's usually pretty easy to tell where your sources are. But if there's something wrong, if there's a problem, sometimes it's a little harder to determine. So I'll need a plot from you in that case.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? That's a pretty good question, actually.
Yeah, when we submit our like final pictures, are we able to like give comments of like our creative theory behind? Because you said you wanted the 3-point and then you want us to do just like some creative lighting. Can we give you like, so what I was thinking for this was a dramatic.
Yes, I love submission notes. I mean, submission notes are really important for critical analysis, for critique, for discussion. I mean, I run into submission notes in the real world all the time. I mean, on one movie, I had a director that wanted me to use specific gels and specific colors for the key lights and for, fill and certain kind of situations where you wanted more contrast and less contrast. And he gave me a little sort of, Bible. This is what this means when I want it lit these ways, and this is what it means when I want it lit these ways, and it pertains to the character feeling this way or that way, and the action that happens here or there. And so that was really important to understanding the context of why you want to use, why you're, you know, you're adamant about these certain color gels, for instance, and, you know, why can't I use a softer key light in situations like this? What's happening to the character that justifies only using a certain kind of light in a certain situation? And that's very helpful. And if you have inspiration or motivation that, you know, helps me to understand why you chose that alternate lighting scheme, then I would love to hear it. Yes, absolutely. So you got to give me a JPEG. So the best way to do it is to create a Word doc and then just, you know, drag and drop or import that JPEG right onto the Word doc document. And then you can give me your little submission notes right below the image. And I think that works best. And it's easy. And I only got to open up one document, right? I don't want to open up a bunch of documents for 130 students. So make it easy on
Like,
Professor Walsh.
yeah, so basically, like, the way we can compile it is all in a Word document. You label the first one as the way you want it, and then you label the second one. Then you put the image there, and then you label you put the second one and label it, and then you put the submission notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. On the first image, you can say standard 3-point lighting. Key is high left of camera or low right of camera. Fill is opposite or, you know, on the same side. And the edge light is on the fill side or on the key side. And it's, you know, or directly behind, you know, give me the basic setup, standard 3-point lighting. And then on your alternate, give me the notes for your alternate. Yeah. And then tell me why. I'd love to hear it.
Okay, cool.
I use 2 lights now for a lot, and sometimes only 1 light for almost, you know, for a lot of stuff.
That's what I've been doing lately as well. Especially
Digital cameras, you know, fill light is, and the ability to control the contrast is something that you really had to pay attention to in the era of film stocks. But now that we have digital cameras and they're so efficient at seeing light, and we have RAW now where we can actually see into the highlights and into the shadows at the same time, which was hard to do with film, and then choose later what we want to see. It has made digital a little bit of a different way of working for me, and I just don't use fill anymore. I just don't. One well-shaped key light is usually all I need, and then I'll put a little kiss, a little cheeker on the other side just for some separation or to change color a little bit to give some dimension. And that's usually how I go, you know, or I go nuts and I have all backlights and no front light, and, you know, depending on what the scenario is. But that's one thing that I found was a gift of the digital era, was that my lighting had the opportunity to reinvent itself and be reborn with a more radical or daring style. You had to be a little bit more traditional with film because it had to be treated in certain ways because of the photochemical nature of it. But now that we have digital and we can isolate things and control elements independently through software, we can do stuff now with our lighting that we could never do with film. And it has broadened the range of expression dramatically, I think. So that's why I'm interested in hearing what your thoughts are on, you know, why you changed it, what you changed, and what your inspiration is. Especially if you're emulating something, let me know what the things are that really light you up, you know, and get you really inspired. So that's good. That's all good stuff. Anybody else have any questions at all? Anything? This one ran a little bit long. It's kind of a broad topic though, and, you know, mostly for lack of a good face-to-face stage situation, it makes it a little longer in terms of a virtual presentation. But I hope that it's, you know, fairly clear, it's working for you on a concept level. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to spend some extra time with you and help you nail this down. Okay. All right. Well, if no one has anything more to add or any questions to ask, then shall we adjourn? All right, let's do so. Have a good afternoon. Thanks for your time and attention. Appreciate it. Reach out if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a good afternoon, and I'll see you all next week.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.